Hello, everyone. My name is Awista, and I am
One sec, Awista. Sorry, one sec. Let Cheryl get herself situated.
Sorry. Got excited.
Can you see it correctly?
No, you got to move this our chat thing or what you see. Yeah, the people over to your other screen. There.
How about that?
There we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
you're welcome. Okay, now go ahead.
Sorry, I know there's like a lot of information.
You ready, my girl?
So welcome to day 5 of admissions and occupancy. Today is September 30th, 2022. This is day 5. My name is Alyssa, and I'm the Training and Development Coordinator. For those of you who are coming in now, I'm going to go ahead and send the link for the materials. There have been issues with our website and trying to access the materials. We are working on it to resolve the issue, so we do apologize for that if you are having a hard time accessing off of the links that we send, or if you try to go on to the website yourself. With that said, I have noticed that also if you are coming on a web browser, there are more technical difficulties versus if you were to come off of the app. So we highly encourage that you download the app so you could have less issues. With that being said, if you're on the web browser or the app, you do have access to your chat box and microphone. We just ask you to please be very patient, or not patient, sorry. To be cautious of when you do use your mic while Cheryl is presenting. We will, at the end of it, ask you if you have any questions. At that time, if you do want to access your mic, you are more than welcome to. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. And at the end, we will make sure that Crystal and I will make sure that Cheryl sees your questions. With that said, Cheryl, would you like to take it away?
Thank you, my girl. And please forgive any of the technical difficulties we're having. The weather's almost out of Florida, but there's still 2 million people there without power. So on for day 5. So we made it to the last day, guys, which is a good thing. This is courtesy of the Native Learning Center. Welcome and good afternoon. I just did go smudge up, so we're ready to go. Here's my information, and it'll also be at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you guys know who I am by now. My name is Cheryl Cosley, and I'm going to leave it at that. We didn't quite get through day 4, A&O issues for other programs and management compliance. And then we have a couple other sections on counseling, collections, and monitoring, and then the appendix items. So yay, we made it to Friday. Flip side of that is, darn it, you gotta finish day 2, and I'm so sorry. I tried, I tried to give you guys too much information is what I try to do, but I'd rather give you too much than not enough. So occupied home repair or rehab programs. And we did get to this point, but I'm going to start from the beginning, which is like a slide and a half. So one of the most common uses for our Indian Housing Block Grant funds is to assist homeowners with repairs or major rehab. And we are one of the most often asked questions is, can I work on something that is not one of our units? It's not something that's currently in our stock. Well, the answer to that is yes, you can also, but you have to describe that activity in your Indian housing plan. As long as it's approved in the plan, your management agrees with that idea, yes, you can do that. But then again, you still have to make sure that they qualify for those programs in that same way that we went over. So a lot of times, we decide that we're going to help homeowners with repairs and major rehab. To accomplish this, you have to create a process for implementing the steps to operate that program. The steps could include, but are not limited by any means, to establishing a written owner-occupied rehab program, which describes who you're going to serve, what type of assistance you're going to give them, and the requirements you're going to have in place for them to receive that assistance. You got to do the marketing on that program and accept those applications, processing applications, and selecting participants. And You have to perform environmental reviews because, you're doing construction related, and, your Davis-Bacon's going to kick in if you're doing over $2,000 worth also. And you have to watch your lead-based paint. So you get used to not doing certain things because your units are a certain age, but then you take on another activity and it's going to kick in. So you also have to develop that paperwork to establish binding commitments, that useful life, make sure they have insurance on them. So with every program that you're going to offer, make sure that you explore it and try to work out all those wrinkles first, okay? Establishing binding commitments to ensure assisted housing remains affordable according to the established useful life. You have to make sure that you develop a proper scope of work. You have to obtain those wage rates. So then again, it's talking about Davis-Bacon wage rates, unless again, your tribe has established what they call a prevailing wage rate for the tribe. And your tribe can do that at any time. Once you do that, you have to do it, you should be checking on it and updating it. There's a lot of mistakes I've seen, and people have, especially if they're not familiar with writing the Indian housing plan, they'll say, yeah, our tribe's got a prevailing wage rate. Well, we don't mean, or they don't mean, the wage rate that tells how much a secretary is going to get paid and how much, a casino worker is going to get paid, or those particular positions. When they're talking about a tribal prevailing wage rate, they're talking construction and maintenance trades, okay? It's something that's got to be adopted, and it's got to be looked at quite often to make sure that you're paying a local prevailing rate. So there's a whole process behind it, but if you do put one in place and your tribe adopts it, you don't have to follow Davis-Bacon. So establishing a project plan, including detailed budgets, schedule, production methods, competitively procuring a contractor. If you're going to use force account, competitively procuring your materials, your tools, your equipment, and the hiring of those workers. And then those insurance requirements are going to kick in. So make sure you know all about that. So implementing work in accordance with plans and your specifications, regularly inspecting work to ensure quality. And probably the most important element of that program is to complete, to have a complete understanding of the obligations and the responsibilities for all your parties involved throughout that entire process. So failure to put this information in writing often results in unrealistic expectations and hard feelings. You do that to cover your six, okay? You do that so your staff is doing things the same way, so that your tribal leadership, whether it be a board of commissioners or your tribal council, there's no question about who you're servicing, when you're servicing them, and how much you're servicing for them, and that they've been in that line, they're next to be served. So it's important that a checklist be used, such as a sample that's in 10.5 and Exhibit 10.5 following, to ensure nothing is actually missed or misunderstood. Now, those exhibits come in and out of order because the way that it was first put together, I don't really like referring to things by exhibit number. It makes it very, very difficult when you move content at all. So I do apologize when something's out of order, but at least you have the information. So a housing rehab program must include all of the relevant information, program eligibility requirements for the staff to perform the admissions component of the program. Additionally, an orientation for your applicants should be conducted for applicants to fully comprehend the responsibilities in arranging for the work to be performed and maintaining the property once that work is completed. There's a sample policy contained in our appendix items at Appendix 19. So this is what the exhibit number is, and it is your checklist for eligibility to make sure that you have income, your consent form for release of information, your verification, your ownership status, Some people will have documents that they don't own any outstanding taxes on the unit. It depends on the protocols and the policies that you put in place, defining that scope of work, inspecting the property, preparing that scope of work, making sure the environmentals are done, going to the Department of Labor, doing your cost analysis. So this is getting into some things that some of you aren't familiar with. Some of you might be if you've been in housing for a long time and you're cross-trained. Okay, so this is the checklist, and there, like I said, there's actually a sample policy in those appendix items. So your home repair agreement, it's an important document that needs to be completed. This agreement should include provisions that comply with your useful life requirements at NAHASDA. The useful life guidance is at 2014-09, and there is another one in there at 2020, so that's 8A and 8 of your appendix items. Some has the documents for the land, and some has, samples. This one has samples that the later one doesn't, so they're both in there. Additionally, agreements have to be recorded, and your insurance requirements actually do reply. So here's a sample program agreement, such as you'll find in your appendix items. Now, weatherization programs, a lot of our housing entities do that. They have a lot of the same, similar considerations as do housing rehab. Standard application form can be used to determine that eligibility. However, additional questions need to be asked to determine the extent of the assistance required. Useful life insurance requirements may apply depending on how much money you're giving them an assistance. The following list includes additional information that needs to be gathered to respond to the intent of a weatherization program, such as, the permission to run an energy audit, to talk to the, propane vendors and electric companies and things like that. Your primary, secondary heating sources, if you're using oil or propane, if you have access to natural gas, if you're using electricity for which appliances, if you have wood, do you have a wood stove, do you have a coal burning stove? Do you have the, oil? So there's lots of things you're going to have to find out, what type of appliances, there's any structural deficiencies, how old's your windows, how old's your roof, have you ever had your attic insulated, in this area, weatherization education requirements, property value information, property standards, warranties. So exhibit 10.7 lists the minimum steps that have to be implemented to ensure program success for a housing rehab, weatherization, and emergency assistance. So that's what that particular one is. Your intake, your initial inspection, verification, verifying that homeowner income, schedule counseling if you need that. You're finalizing that agreement, your construction contracting. So this will, make sure that you look and think about all those steps when you develop a program. So our next section is lease management and compliance. Tribes and housing authorities are required to adopt a rental program dwelling lease that contains provisions from section 207 of NAHASDA. It's a lease to own and home ownership program. They can actually have separate leases and occupancy agreements. All leases and occupancy agreements and any changes to them should be reviewed by an attorney before they're implemented. Even when I was telling you about my tribal council putting an addendum on a lease, it always went to the legal staff first. So don't ever alter a lease without getting those eyes on that first, okay? There's certain things that you have to do. So your lease requirements and tenant selection, leases, except to the extent otherwise provided by or an inconsistent, with tribal law in renting dwelling units in an affordable housing assisted with grant amounts provided under this act, the owner or manager of the housing shall utilize a lease that don't contain unreasonable terms and conditions. You just, you can't put them in there. Require that the owner or the manager to maintain the housing in compliance with
Probably
applicable.
word and leave something like maybe 300 or something.
Okay.
It's that, but because I was timed out, it's.
I need somebody to mute their mic. That requires the owner or the manager to maintain the housing in compliance with applicable housing codes and quality standards. Require the owner or the manager to give adequate written notice of termination of the lease. You just can't say you got to be out of there tomorrow. Which shall be the period of time required under your state, tribal, or local law, and specify with the respect to any notice of eviction or termination, notwithstanding state, tribal, or local law, a resident shall be informed of the opportunity prior to any hearing or trial to examine any relevant documents that you have, records, or regulations directly relating to that eviction or that termination of services. So, require that the owner or manager may not terminate the tenancy during the term of the lease except for serious, or repeated violation of the terms or conditions of the lease, violation for applicable federal, state, tribal, or local law, or for other good causes, or provide that the owner or manager may terminate the tenancy of a resident for any activity engaged in by that resident, a member of their household of the resident, or any guest. That's why it's or other person under the control of the residents. That's why it's so very important when you do those intakes and you get them ready to move them in someplace, that those adults in that household realize that they are responsible for the activities of their guest, of their grandson, of their son's best buddy who's coming to stay with them, you're going to be responsible. If they're going to be in your dwelling unit, you better make sure that you can maintain control of them. So make sure you get that point across. Anything that threatens the health, the safety, the right to peaceful enjoyment of your other tenants, and your employees are actually included in that. The law protects your employees also. The employees or owner or manager of the housing, okay? Threatens the health or safety or right to peaceful enjoyment of the premises by persons residing in that immediate vicinity of the premises, or it's considered a criminal activity, including drug-related criminal activity on or off the premises. So, we are allowed to do evictions for something that does not happen on our property. So your dwelling lease is one of the most important documents used within your occupancy. It defines your binding contractual obligation between the recipient and the resident, and it offers the opportunity for you as a recipient to exercise its discretion. However, there are several suggested do's and don'ts you should consider. A list of the inclusions is contained in Exhibit 11.1, and a sample dwelling lease is included in Appendix 20. So rental lease inclusions, identification of the parties who's going to be residing in that unit, dwelling location, term, amount and due date of your payments, other charges, amount and use of security deposit, residents' right to use and occupancy, receipt of your policies, that they actually got those. Always put a signature page on policies that you're going over with your tenants. So when they come back in and say, you never told me that, you can say, here's your signature that you received those policies. Okay. Notice procedures, court jurisdictions, recertifications, changes in house payments, household composition, utility services provided, if any, tenant responsibility for your utilities and solid waste, the inspections, resident maintenance responsibilities, housekeeping standards, defects, hazards to life, health, or safety, tenant caused damages, charges, and corrective actions, entry of the dwelling unit during tenancy, termination of lease, your grievance procedures, your provisions of modifications, criminal activity, illegal drug use, appliance use as intended, not using that kitchen stove to heat the house, septic system guidelines, don't be flushing baby wipes and cigarette butts, and try to keep your children from flushing Hot Wheels, appliance use as attended. Again, recipient obligations, evictions, administrative remedies, your signature clauses, your pet and your livestock restrictions, you know. Are you going to allow a horse in your housing project? We had that one. Parking restrictions and abandoned vehicles. One of the caveats there, and I share that when I work with policies or do a policy class, don't put a policy in effect that you are not going to enforce. You need to find a way to redo it, remove it, and find something that you can and will enforce. Should you have something with an abandoned vehicle and you have a child get hurt, or it fall off the blocks and hurt somebody or something like that, they're going to look to sue you. And then the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go around and they're going to see if you have any more abandoned vehicles in your area. And if it's against your lease, or it's against, one of the protocols that they've been given that they're not allowed to have those, and they can find 3 or 4 of them, you're going to open yourself up for a lot of trouble because you're not enforcing the policies that you have in place. Okay. Require your abandoned vehicles. Don't have them. Require them to have valid insurance and plates on them. That's one way to get away from an abandoned vehicle. If they're not licensed and insured, you need to remove them from the property, but you have to enforce it. So your dwelling leases. There's suggested addenda to dwelling leases for many program uses. These items are part of the lease, usually signed and dated separately by that resident. The reason they're included with the lease is because the information or requirements may change periodically during that term of the lease. It's easier to change the addendum rather than the entire lease. The list of occupants residing in the unit, the notice of payment and collection procedures, the Federal Privacy Act statement, drug-free housing statements, rules of occupancy, requirement to maintain an essential family status if you have one, and for continued occupancy for an essential family. Those exclusions. The following are some prohibited lease provisions or exclusions, along with a short description of each. You can't ask for that confession of judgment. Residents cannot be required to give consent to judgments against them before you have made a lawsuit against that resident. Residents cannot be required to say I'm guilty before they even know the charges. Seizure of personal property for rent or for other charges. It's not allowable to establish an agreement that will permit you to take the resident's property or possessions as collateral for rent or other charges specified in that lease. For example, impounding a resident's car because he or she owns maintenance charges is illegal. I don't know anybody that's ever tried that. Exculpatory charges. You can't wash your hands of all liability before the fact. Requiring the resident to agree to such a clause in the lease is not permitted. A waiver of legal notice by the resident prior to actions for eviction or money judgments. The resident must be given the right to the notice of your intended legal actions against him or her. He or she cannot be denied this right. Waiver of legal proceedings. The resident cannot be denied his or her right to legal proceedings in the event of a dispute. Starting eviction proceedings or holding a resident's possessions prior to the resident's right to a legal proceeding is prohibited. Waiver of a jury trial. The resident cannot be denied the constitutional right for legal proceedings relevant to a dispute between the resident and you as the recipient. Waiver of the right to appeal a judicial error in legal proceedings. In the event that the court makes an error in a ruling, the lease cannot require that the resident be denied his or her right to appeal. Resident responsible for legal actions regardless of outcome. You cannot be required, or your residents cannot be required to pay for court costs and attorney fees for any legal action that you initiate, regardless of who wins. For example, if you have established a court cost of $20 for each non-payment of rent case taken to court, the resident cannot be billed for that $20 if the court's judgment is in the resident's favor. We have a lot of housing entities that do this. You can't charge them for those court fees unless they lose, okay? On the other hand, if the resident loses, you can charge them the $20, but you can't just slap that court fee charge, filing charge, whatever on them right off the bat. Okay. Exclusions. If you are at all familiar with the Constitution of the United States, you're going to recognize that many of these exclusions reinforce many rights of the all American citizens enjoy. These rights apply to residents of Indian housing programs also. Your lease should contain all the terms and conditions necessary to protect the rights and uphold the responsibilities of both your housing program and its customers. The lease should be practical, enforceable, consistent with the qualifications and expectations of your customers. Remember that the dwelling lease is the legal agreement that outlines how you and your residents will interact. So, a lease purchase agreement. A lease purchase agreement is a lease that allows the homeowner to purchase their unit or to lease the unit with an exclusive option to purchase. This agreement specifies the resident's obligation over the term of the contract, including the obligation to perform or pay for required maintenance, the ability to provide a contribution in land, materials, cash, or labor. In our instance, our tribe gave each tribal member that was in a lease purchase program 1 acre of land. They valued the land at $1,500, which meant the requirement of that contribution. The capacity to pay monthly homebuyer payments. Homebuyers must also pay utilities and monthly administrative charges, if any. Lease purchase agreement. Because financial eligibility criteria for homebuyer programs are more stringent than your rental program, some recipients have separate admissions policies designed to identify prospective homebuyers with the ability to meet those obligations of that program. A&O policies may also include mandatory housing counseling requirements to help your participants understand their financial and their social responsibilities as participants within your homebuyer program. An orientation, regardless of the program type, an orientation for any applicant family must include a thorough review of your applicable lease agreement. Somebody's got to go through that with them. For example, important points that should be covered when you're reviewing that lease for a rental unit include use of the unit only as a principal private residence. Okay, we're not running a mechanical garage out of there. Pay rent and utilities on a regular basis. Keep the unit in good and safe condition. Cooperate with annual income recertification procedures and your periodic inspections. Assure that your household members and guests follow your reasonable rules and do not disturb your neighbors. Explain who's responsible for furnishing the specified utilities and the appliances. Explain tenant responsibilities to maintain that property in that decent, safe and sanitary condition. Familiarize the tenant with the process for requesting maintenance and policies about charging tenants for tenant-caused damage. So at this point, I would always have the Friday afternoon discussions with the people that I was bringing in. Please, if you have a maintenance difficulty, now if you're out of heat and it just went off, you call us at any time. But if you've got a toilet that's running or a cabinet that you need the face put back on or something that happened early in the week, please don't wait till 3 or 4 o'clock on a Friday to call my maintenance guys and have them come in. Have me have to pull them back in if they're already off or it's a holiday weekend. Please just show them consideration also. If it's an emergency, by all means, you call us. But if it's something that you've known about all week long or something that you could possibly live with until Monday, you can call in and put the order in. But, don't make me call in these guys, make them, come off. So I always had that discussion because I very, very much valued my maintenance guys, so explain how that tenant should notify your housing program, your office when it changes, the family circumstances, or the family intends to move out. Now, in this two circumstances here. I'd have that move out package that I made. This is what I expect you to do, you know. And I'd also have that conversation, okay, if you lose somebody, if your husband leaves, if you have your son was paying part of the rent and he moved out or whatever, you have that 30% talk with them. If you have that drop in income, please notify us as soon as possible. We're not looking to kick you out. We're looking to make sure that you don't fall behind. We have to follow this regulation, and we can't charge you more than this amount. So it's really important that you get a hold of us. Always have that 30% conversation with them. Okay. Describe the procedures that are going to be followed in terminating a tenancy. If that tenant violates your lease, how disputes and grievances will be handled. Review insurance coverage available, including insurance that you provide, resources for tenants to obtain content or renter's insurance, the process for filing claims, circumstances under which tenant family is responsible for payments of a deductible, so your compliance issues. Lease compliance issues range from simple issues that can be handled by your staff to complex issues that might require you to take legal action. In all cases, preventative approaches ensure that time and money are spent more appropriately on housing services than on court actions. Basic compliance areas that are critical to continued occupancy include maintenance, inspections, your recertification, housing counseling, and collections. So your maintenance responsibilities vary based on your specific programs and your requirements. Generally, tribes or housing authorities provide maintenance for rental housing, while homeowners or home buyers must provide most of the work on their properties. Most programs funds restrict maintenance services to normal wear and tear and non-routine maintenance. Where tenant damage exceeds normal wear and tear, your recipient, you may adopt a policy to charge those tenants for that work required, and we did that. Maintenance policies describe the responsibilities of you as a recipient and them as a tenant. A basic policy covering at least the following topics provide a helpful tool for your occupancy staff that are working with those families. It's a good idea to include excerpts of your maintenance policy in your standard lease agreement. Regardless of the housing assistance program, all families are expected to maintain the property in that safe and sanitary condition. Describe those emergency, urgent, routine, and non-routine services, vacated unit repair, preventive maintenance, inspections, rights of access, work order process, standards of work, schedule of cost, forms, and maintenance counseling. Your inspections. Generally, all the housing programs have a requirement for unit inspections. A tribal housing program that is responsible for the management and the operation of 37 Act homes and housing developed using IHBG funds must perform inspections in accordance with PIH Notice 2012-45 as follows. Initial inspections must be performed on all units constructed, acquired, and rehabilitated with NAHASDA funds. The units must be inspected by the recipient subsequent to, during the provision of such assistance, and prior to occupancy by that beneficiary household, or in the instance of an owner-occupied housing, upon completion of that rehab work to ensure that that work performed and or condition of the housing meets your approved standards. Strongly recommended that the recipient document when and by whom the inspections were performed, and that the result of the inspections be maintained by the recipient and made available during an on-site monitoring review. In this day and age with this kind of phone, you have one of your maintenance guys pick up the phone, take a screenshot of the other guy. You can see what time and what date they were in those units. That's one of the first things that we did when we were taking a picture. You can use video, you can use pictures, HDS, you can upload your stuff, it's a wonderful thing. It's a lot easier now than it used to be. Recurring inspection requirements. NAHASDA requires recipients to review their housing for compliance not less frequently than annually. And as part of that review, to carry out an appropriate level of on-site inspection. Evaluating the condition of the housing assisted under NAHASDA is an integral part of your recipient's self-assessment responsibilities. In determining the appropriate level of on-site inspection, it's incumbent upon a recipient to include the inspection of housing on a reasonable schedule in its policies governing the management and maintenance of assisted housing. Found within Section 203E, periodic scheduled inspections will allow a recipient to adequately assess the ongoing compliance of such units with the requirements of NAHASDA. You're supposed to inspect them once a year. If somebody moves in, that can count as your inspection. You know, make sure somebody's tracking it every time you go through there and do something like that. A move in, a move out, you've been in that unit within a year. But make sure that they're done within a year. You should have that on a computer somewhere because your executive director has to report on that in your annual performance report on a yearly basis. How many of those units did you guys go do? And they will audit it. Okay. All units that are constructed, acquired, and rehabilitated with NAHASDA, operated and managed by you as a recipient, but maintained by the occupant purchaser under a lease agreement. Rental units constructed, acquired, same thing, owned by the recipient, but operated or managed by another entity. Or rental units constructed, acquired, rehabilitated with NAHASDA funds that are owned by another entity, but are operated and managed by you as the recipient of affordable housing under NAHASDA. Reoccurring inspections do not apply to owner-occupied units that receive NAHASDA assistance for rehab, or units that are being purchased by a family with the NAHASDA-based financing or mortgage assistance. These units would, however, be subject to an inspection prior to and during the period of rehab or prior to the purchase and the occupancy of the beneficiary household to ensure the recipient standards of quality is met. Lease purchase units occupied by a family are subject to recurring inspection requirements because they are owned and operated by you as the recipient. What that means, if you're giving down payment assistance to somebody, you don't have to inspect it except for within the confines of the purchase, okay? To make sure that what you're purchasing is adequate. When they are in what is like our old mutual help program, and there are some people that have modeled that program and continued to do that with NAHASDA, still call them mutual help. You need to rename them because it confuses staff later on, because there's rules that apply strictly to mutual help units, but they don't mean the mutual help units that are bought with NAHASDA funds, okay? So name them something else. They're in a lease to own, and you as the recipient own that dwelling until they make their last payment. In that case, you have to inspect them, okay? So, because you're still the owner. So your period of reoccurring inspection responsibilities, that reoccurring recipient inspection requirement will eventually terminate. For rental housing, the requirement expires when the unit is no longer required to remain affordable housing upon the end of its useful life. But if you're still getting monies for those things, you have to still inspect them, okay? As defined under 24 CFR 1142, for mutual help homes developed under Section 202 of the 1937 Act, so that's pre-NAHASDA, and lease purchase housing developed with NAHASDA funds, the recurring inspection requirement expires when you convey that unit to that home buyer, okay? So your recerts, even though recertifying the income of a residence or home buyers is not required, it's still a good practice to require recertification annually, especially for the rentals, okay? That is not residents and home buyers. You need to make sure, because you're going to get, it's a catch-22. You have to prove that you're not charging them over 30% of their income. So you need to do those recerts. Their income, their release of information is going to expire. It's only good for 13 months. Okay, you need to do the research. So I don't like the way that language reads. Scheduling. Recertification can be scheduled on the anniversary date of the lease or your homebuyer agreement execution. You can also recertify your residents on alternate dates to spread out the workload. I know that ours would do project at a time, you know. So all residents of a certain community or neighborhood could be recertified at the same time for efficiency. Alternate dates can also be desirable, especially when families are dispersed, if you've got a wide geographic area that you do. In any event, recertification scheduling should be well planned so it can be performed in a timely and effective manner on your behalf. And you always give them notice that you're coming in there. It's strange. I had somebody call me one time and he was in a mutual help unit and he used to flunk his every once in a while, you know. He called, I took the phone. They said, I'm not going to say his name. It's on the phone, Cheryl. And hey, what can I do for you? He said, when are you going to do inspections? I said, well, I usually don't do them till, you know, and where we're at, we have snow from Halloween till mid-May, usually. I said, till I can really see the garage. Not the garage, excuse me, the ground outside. I said, so probably the end of May, the first part of June. I said, what's the matter? Do you need something fixed? What's going on? He said, no. He says, I was hoping you were going to inspect the house. It's the only time my wife really cleans the house. So here I thought I was going to get yelled at and everything else, but no, this was a gentleman that wanted me to inspect his house so his wife would clean it. I said, you know, you can help with that too, but okay, enough. So timing of the recerts. You should begin recertifications at least 90 days in advance of your scheduled recertification dates. You can elect to send out an initial notice in advance to schedule the recertification interview, provide checklist of what you would like them to bring to that interview. During your interview, the staff member should obtain proper signatures on the verifications and release forms. Of course, after you obtain the proper signatures, the staff should send out the documents to verify that information that affects the family's income and their rent or their home buyer payment. Verifications should be obtained by 30, you know, that third party thing that we went through one of those 2 days ago. Once all verifications are obtained, complete the necessary income and payment calculations. This procedure should be completed no later than 30 days in advance of your scheduled effective date of recertification. This affords the time to give your resident the proper 30-day notice of a rent increase, if necessary, as required by most tenant and landlord laws. Okay. So recertifications. Are they eligible at the initial the initial application? No rent change for the first year. So then you're going to do your annual. If there's an intern recertification required, if it changes like $250 or there's a change in household composition, you might want to, you know, bring them in and make sure that they're still at that same amount. Your recerts, you know, if they're having any difficulties, if they're move out, you know, or you find them now ineligible, you know, there's different reasons that you sometimes have those interim recertifications. You can establish policies and standards for the adjustment of that monthly payment charge between regularly scheduled recertifications. Your policy should be effectively communicated in writing to your residents to assure that they understand their obligation to report interim changes in income and household. They need to tell you when their income goes up also, or they change their jobs that affect their rent and their home buyer payments. It's a good idea to have something in your lease and or policy that states that the tenant does not promptly report income changes, that recomputation of rent will be backdated to the date the change occurred. I've seen some people that say, but if it benefits us, we're not necessarily going to do that, you know, and you got to do it, you know, whatever you do it the right way. So Interim recertifications, some examples where interim recertifications could be appropriate. They lose their job, they go on unemployment or welfare, they retired, they go on Social Security, a resident passes away, there's a loss of income and a change in family composition. The resident moves out, there's a change of income and family composition. A resident changes employment and receives a substantial increase in pay. A resident family has a baby and there's a change in the family composition. A resident who was certified as unemployed obtains employment. A resident has experienced a substantial increase in allowances such as childcare, medical expenses, handicap expenses, or excessive travel, or maybe they turn 62 or whatever age your tribe has adopted. So your interim recertifications, you should have policies that guide the implementation of that process. Continued occupancy is determined through your recertification process. To obtain the family's cooperation, your staff should thoroughly cover your requirements during the orientation process and then the lease review session. Non-compliance should typically follow the same process mentioned for compliance with maintenance and inspection requirements. Corrective action in all instances where it appears to be a failure to perform, legal action should be preceded by taking the following actions. Initiate some communication by phone. Make a home visit. Write the first letter to explain the following. Your efforts to contact the family, nature of the issue, process to resolve the issue, time frame by which the housing staff have to be notified. Sometimes you have to make sure that you tell both adults in the family what's going on. Sometimes the other adult doesn't receive notification that they're late on their rent, or they have no idea that their rent is not being paid. That makes it a difficult thing to do, but sometimes you have to reach out and do that. I used to have a lot of dads that would come in with because we have a huge amount, like I think 30 or 40% of our population is under a certain age here, which showed us we had to build apartment buildings. And we're going through that same swing again here. Good reason you have, surveys of your ages of and your grant writers can help with that too. What age is your population? But the dads would bring the daughters in and move them into a house and whatever. And sometimes they'd sit there with them when we'd go through this stuff. And I would say, do you mind if I reach out to your dad if I need you for anything? And they usually look at me, no, that's no problem. What about if you're late on your payment or anything? Do I have permission? And I would document that in the file if they say yeah. And 9 times out of 10, it was a horrible thing to do, but dad would come pay that rent. So that's another way around it. Kid got to stay in there, dad paid the rent, at least it got paid. Okay, so corrective action in all instances where there appears to be a failure to perform, those legal actions should be preceded by, like I said, all of those steps. Write a letter on your corrective action, your second letter to explain. Same thing, the efforts, the nature, the process that you've gone through in your time frame. That third letter informing the family that the situation is being referred for legal action. So you should have a set and a procedure, So your corrective actions when you're dealing with maintenance, research, collection, documentation is critical. Always, always. I always had a pad of paper on my desk that I might have had to search through to find it, but I would be able to find it. Laura called at 9:29 or called on 9:29 at 2:45, and this is what we discussed and this is what I told her. And then when they came in and they'd say, yeah, I asked you about that, a couple of months ago, and well, you were here on the 29th of September, and this is what you asked me, and this is what I told you. And then they won't try to pull that again. When they know that you're writing down your conversations, they won't try to assume that you're a dingbat or you're going to forget, or, you can say, no, this is the day you were here. And if nothing else, I used to write notes and have a basket under my desk, and, I'd throw it in the basket, and then, because you're always a lot busier than you anticipate you're going to be. But if you would ever need it, you can find it in there. So always keep track when you have conversations with people. Tell them when you're out of work to call your voicemail and leave a message on there. Don't be discussing work off the clock. Okay. I know you're not at work. People used to grab me, I know you're not at work. And my husband, which I had to get after him for a while, he'd say, she's not working. And he'd have my business cards even. Call and leave a message on the answering machine, but that's pretty much what I would do too. Please, I'm not working right now. I don't want to be discussing this out in this, so try not to do that. Always keep answering machines where people can leave messages for you. Then you have proof of that also. So when dealing with those, letters describing noncompliance, the corresponding corrective action details have to be supported with that written documentation. Phone contact prior to submitting a corrective action plan facilitates the opportunity to prepare that family prior to receiving the notices. This is what I'm going to have to do. So in about 2 weeks, if I don't get that money, you're going to get a notice. It's coming certified mail, and this is what it means. You kind of outlay, this is what you're going to do. So Appendix 23 contains some sample letters in there used to describe non-compliance issues, corrective action plans. So counseling, collections, monitoring, and those are all the appendix items. Make sure you guys get them by the end of the class. So Native people are accessing housing assistance opportunities through a wide variety of our programs. Tribes and housing authorities are offering program designs such as tenant-based rental assistance, TBRA, emergency housing, lease with option to purchase, rental housing, down payment assistance, home purchase. As a result, our housing counseling is becoming more and more critical to help families navigate through, all of our housing programs and their requirements. Ongoing housing counseling can be a critical component of helping residents to become and remain successful homeowners or renters. Now, if you're a small housing entity, you usually don't have counselors on staff, but you probably have got a couple of people within your staff, even if it's the ED or the assistant, that can help with some of this when you're getting, people ready for certain things. So get them some training, cross-train them, whatever, to learn how to do counseling. It's going to come into play and help you with different things along the road. Pathways is really a good program. There's a couple of them out there, so what is housing counseling? That process to sharing information between your client and your housing counselor or your housing staff helps alleviate your client's housing programs. Hopefully, it's usually personal and specific to each client, conducted one-on-one in private. Every housing entity should have a private area to bring your tenants. Okay. That should not be done in front of other people, including other staff. Every once in a while we'd see them and we'd bring them into our lunch area or whatever. But when you do that, you got to make sure your staff doesn't come into the lunch area, so you should have that private area. The art of helping people discover a way to help themselves, a relationship between a trained helping person and your client, somebody with a problem, the process of solving problems in a professional manner. And your housing counselor is a staff person who works with the client to overcome obstacles in meeting housing obligations. Why can't you pay your rent? Are you having I used to teach them budgeting and I'd show them my budget. I make, fairly good money, but this is how, and I did it by quarter, this I got paid on this day. These are the ones I paid, or I put, a particular amount of that money away for that following week. And you don't see me in the casino very, very rarely, I would share that with them, maybe you need to cut the cable bill, and if you have to, buy Netflix, or, so you can learn to do that even with a smaller staff. But you can't have the wrong person in that role. You have to have a caring person. You don't get the one that's snobby or your woohoo girl or whatever in that position. You find somebody that's, got a good heart. The process of solving problems in a professional manner. Your housing counselor is a staff person who works with those clients to overcome those obstacles in meeting their housing obligations. Some of the areas that housing counseling includes: budgeting for financial housing obligations, debt management, credit repair, homebuyer ed, advocacy, self-sufficiency, financial literacy, maintenance counseling, fire safety, pre-purchase counseling, early intervention before delinquency, mortgage delinquency, loss mitigation, post-purchase, including home improvement and rehab, mobility, relocation assistance, rental assistance, renter's insurance. The housing entity covers the building, but not the personal contents, grievance policy. So all of those are some of the topics, Some common housing counseling goals for tribes and housing authorities are to increase home ownership opportunities for your low and moderate families through problem-solving strategies, to foster development, life skills. Some of our tribal members were never really taught to clean a dwelling unit. Some of them weren't used to a modern home, okay? Or they didn't grow up with a mom in their house. So sometimes there's lots of housing entities now that welcome their tenants, and it's an eligible expense, with a basket full of cleaning materials and a plunger. So they don't have to call the maintenance guys. This is your welcome basket. These are cleaning tips or whatever, those are things that are eligible expenses that you can do. To foster human development, individual empowerment, and improved quality of life through education and economic self-sufficiency. To foster community development by strengthening the social and economic bonds of your communities through increased housing assistance. Case management approach to serving clients in which both housing and non-housing needs are addressed through a comprehensive community resource network. So our challenges: providing housing counseling brings counselors face to face, with a lot of problems that are perhaps confronting, families, people that could be in abusive relationships and things like that. So you should have some referrals of people ready for them. Hardship with meeting housing obligations occur for many numbers of reasons. Too much debt, lack of stable employment. Many families fail to make house payments in a timely manner because they lack the resources to save that money or handle those emergencies. Debt management, budgeting, credit repair are critical to meeting housing obligations and achieving housing goals. My children, I have two of my own and then my step boys, but there's quite a few years difference between them. But the oldest is a girl, and she cannot save if she gets $3,000 back in taxes, she's going to spend $2,999 of that. Now, the son, on the other hand, knows about the bank, knows about how to use a credit card, knows that he should be paying it off on a monthly basis, or it should only be used for emergencies. And as much as you try, it just whoosh, sometimes with the other one. I am not your personal bank, but there's some people that don't get it, and some that you can work with them to tell them why it's so very important to take a little bit of that and put it somewhere where you leave it alone. And maybe for Christmas, it's easier to take $5 out of every check. And I tell them about the Christmas accounts. I did it for years. Every paycheck money came out for Christmas. That was the only way that I was going to afford to be able to do it, so you got to teach them things like that. So debt management, budgeting, credit repair. Credit repair is a huge thing, especially in these days. And so you can show them how much it costs them a month. And if they don't make that payment, like by the 13th, if they don't receive it, how much, just by making it a day late, and that just paying it on the 13th doesn't mean that it's getting paid, on the 13th, things like that, teaching them. So there's lots of challenges. Many tenants don't have resources to properly handle home maintenance obligations. Carrying out simple home maintenance procedures is another challenge tenants face because many have never turned off water to the house. So in this case, once somebody got through their first inspection and my guys would come back in again, I would have them show them where the shutoff was. Show them both. Show the man, show the wife if they're both there. Show the oldest son. You know, that's the one thing about somebody from the age of 12 to 15. They usually don't forget anything. Where I might forget something you told me. You tell my granddaughter, she's not forgetting anything. Okay. Show them where the shutoff is while you're doing your inspections. So it's important to do things like that. It might be quite a long time before maintenance guys could get there. We ask that our maintenance man live within 5 miles of our reservation for response time. Okay, that's one of the things that we do. Many tenants don't have those resources. Make them, where that breaker box is, how to reset it. We used to have to show them certain things like our pipes would blow over with the snow, and then the pilots and stuff would go out. So you have to make sure that they didn't do that. Certain things you learn, where the GFI switches are. We had one in one project that was located at the end of a counter and people couldn't find them. I've got no power anywhere on the counters around my stove. Well, and you could hear my staff. Okay, I need you to go left, walk to the end of the counter, see that thing, it's got a red and a blue, push the blue one. Did you hear a click? Now you should have power, or the stoves that don't bake unless the clock is set. Doesn't work really well for places like this where our power goes out and blinks all the time. So you have to make sure that they know all those little idiosyncrasies. So the housekeeping and cleaning routines may be new. So show them, mop on this day, do this day. I've done that with people too. So it's not all overwhelming. If you do it once every 2 weeks, it's not going to be too bad. So counseling barriers, slow payments, credit issues, your slow payments. Maybe work with budgeting worksheets and debt monitoring, credit issues, credit repair letters, insufficient income, maybe a second job, high debt or slow payment. There's power pay. There's different programs like that help. Low savings, give them, the budgeting worksheets, employment stability, help them with the resume, refer them to the tribe's office. We would keep all the jobs open for the tribe on our bulletin board so people could come in and look at, there's jobs right now. I think you could probably do this. Trust property, lease resolution, things like that. So keep them well informed. So housing counseling includes a lot of different types to respond to challenges that our families experience. To acquire housing, meet those lease obligations. Each of the following types involves budgeting, but focuses on a family-specific need, such as pre-occupancy counseling matches the family with the program best suited for their needs. Rental occupancy, that counseling assists them in meeting financial obligations of leasing. Pre-purchase counseling assists them become, mortgage ready. Credit counseling helps them to repair those credit issues. Debt management helps families better manage their expenses and pay down the credit cards and combine them and things like that. Post-purchase counseling assists those families having trouble in meeting some of those new homeownership obligations. So delivering your housing counseling services, they can be combined into group sessions, but one-on-one is really necessary for some components of it to give them a chance to discuss matters with, that is private, that they'd be embarrassed to do that in front of someone else. They should be offered at convenient times and locations. Client intake. This initial meeting affords the staff time to meet the family, introduce the different services you have, explain to the family your application process, the various consent to release information forms, scheduling future appointments. So, you can run their credit. We ran credit right within our office off, and then we would start with the credit counseling, and then we would put them and offer them home ownership opportunities, whether it be rural development because it was the lowest based, or that 184 program, or conventional loans where we would help them with down payment assistance and, walk them through that whole process. It's daunting if you've never done it, so scheduling a future appointment to review that credit and debt, registering for classes, should hopefully be completed during that meeting. And then you can do group instruction, an orientation program that informs your families about steps they need to prepare themselves for financial obligations, responsibilities of renting, home ownership, or a cleaning class if you have, there's different, you create your problem to fix your need. So, it can be in group settings or it can be, one-on-one. It should try to make it fun though, and then they'll want to come back. So that one-on-one counseling, most effective when 90% of that counseling effort is delivered as one-on-one. Many families experience financial hardship for varieties of reasons. Some duties expected of your occupancy staff could include the ability to assess the family's financial needs, to work one-on-one with the family, to develop an action plan to meet housing goals. This process involves establishing financial goals, reviewing credit reports, calculating debt ratios, creating or reviewing budgets, developing an action plan which outlines the client's obstacles to meeting their obligations, steps to overcoming them, time frame, and schedule your follow-up sessions. So Appendix 21 contains a sample client action plan. Pathways, you can get that information also free. It's got a lot of wonderful stuff in there, or the train the trainer classes, so individual counseling and troubleshooting tools. The following tools can assist your staff in efforts to help your families overcome their challenges for financial, for their housing obligations. Credit rebuilding letters are available in that Pathway Homes that I was just talking about, a native guide to home ownership. It can be used for a housing counselor to provide a client to initiate and document constructive dialogue with your creditors and your credit reporting agencies to assist in rebuilding that. Power Pay, which is a debt reduction system. So you can read more about that at powerpay.org, So there's a lot of tools out there. Individual counseling and troubleshooting tools. A budgeting worksheet can help your housing counselor in developing spending plans to achieve the goals. Those tools can help a client establish a realistic budget. How much is I can't afford, and they can use themselves as an example if they have the right persona to them, maybe we shouldn't be having the $9 coffee every morning. Buy a Keurig or whatever and bring it in a, I've got a Contigo. This is how I do it. I make it at home. I save $5, monthly budget worksheets, debt worksheets, income worksheet, pre-qualifying worksheets. So there's lots of them out there. That Pathways Home, a native home ownership guide, a curriculum available through, you can get it through NIHC if you want also, is an excellent tool for acquainting families with financial obligations associated with housing. It's divided into 8 modules and a glossary, exploring home ownership, considering mortgage-based home ownership, budgeting for home ownership and calculating that affordability, evaluating credit for home ownership, finding a home, applying for a home loan, meeting your financial obligations, and protecting your investment. So your collections, guys. I didn't squeeze it tight enough. Your purposes of your collection policy. Make sure you have a good one, and then make sure they follow it. Doesn't matter who it is, it should be set steps. This is what happens on the 10th. This is what happens on the 16th. This is what happens on the 31st, or regardless of whose name it is. Okay. And they should be doing it to everybody. You don't let people get to the point where they're owing your housing authority $2,000-3,000 because then they won't be able to afford to pay you back. Okay. You're not doing them a service when you're not collecting your funds on a timely basis either. Okay. The purposes of a collection policy is to inform the tenants and the home buyers of your established guidelines, for the collection of rent, house payments, housing services, payment of work orders, and other charges. The goal of the policy is to collect the amounts owed to the program to ensure the continuation, of an adequate housing services, while providing for the safety and the well-being of your residents, promoting fairness, due process, and the policy should apply to residents who have entered into a lease or a homeownership agreement with you as a recipient. The following requirements may be included in your policy. The amount of your required monthly payment will be stipulated in the lease or the homeownership agreement. If the resident fails to meet his or her financial obligation, including payment of required rent, the account should be handled as a delinquent account. The ability to meet financial obligations is a requirement of your initial admissions and for continued occupancy. If the resident presents evidence of an inability to pay or make a full payment due to hardship, you or your policy can make, allow for that consideration of an extension or the negotiation of a settlement, your payback agreement. The resident should contact the staff prior to the date to receive an extension. Tell me why you're not paying it by the 15th. If you can't pay it by this date, call me in advance. They need to know that. I'm sorry your mom's in the hospital and you had to go downstate. I understand that. Just try to make sure that it's paid in full by the end of next month. And then you make your waiver or whatever you do, so your staff know not to put the late charges on there and things like that. But you need for your tenants to realize that they have to contact you. It's not your job to chase them, because by then you've already taken these kind of steps, if they present that evidence of that inability to pay due to hardship, you come up with whatever plan you decide is right. The extension deadline will become the new due date. Extreme circumstances may be considered in approving an extension to the due date. Such conditions can include a death in an immediate family or other disaster that affects the financial state of the family, When the resident presents credible evidence that clearly shows an inability to make a full payment, you can take a partial payment. A notice of delinquency may be sent to a resident who has not made his or her full monthly payment by the date or the time specified. The notice of delinquency is a written demand for immediate payment of the past due balance. The notice shall inform the delinquent resident to make an immediate payment for continued occupancy of that housing unit. Upon service of the notice of delinquency, the resident has specified the amount of time to remit the delinquent amount in full or commit to that payback agreement. The notice may also recommend that the delinquent resident immediately contact the housing staff regarding any financial problems or unusual circumstances. The notice may inform the resident that failure to comply with the notice will result in a notice of termination. A budget counseling session could be scheduled with the resident during the period of account delinquency. While the policy should require a minimum of one budget counseling session, that's if you have counselors, prior to termination of the lease or home buyer agreement, a series of follow-up counseling sessions is recommended. A housing counselor is responsible for providing family budgeting and maintenance counseling. They often have the discretion to negotiate a payback agreement with delinquent residents before the notice of termination is served, okay? If you've got a good person in that job, give them the leeway to be able to do that. They just have to be consistent. They can't just keep doing it because it's their sister-in-law or whatever reason that be, and then not do it for the first time for somebody they're not related to, You have to, because that'll be looked at. It's got to be consistent. I hate to say this, but we're here to provide housing for our people, okay? But if you never evict anybody, you better be collecting all of your money, because that's what you're going to get the reputation. Don't worry about it. They won't evict us. In your tribal council, they're elected officials. They shouldn't be going and skipping over you by any means. When this starts to occur, okay? They need to know that. They need to know that the process that you go through is fair, and these are the steps we take, okay? If they want to bail them out with their own money, let them do it, but they should never ever jump in there and say, hey, you can't kick them out, you can't do that, you know. And I've actually, you know, went in different places and here once, are you gonna, you know, overturn something in the court? Because if I bring it to court and the court evicts them, they're going. Otherwise, I'm gonna probably, you know, bring you up for recall or whatever. You don't overrule the court. So make sure that you're doing things very consistently for everybody. Follow your policy. You know, you can enter into this stuff ahead of time to try to protect them, but you have to make sure that you follow through also when it's time to do that. And when that's what your paperwork says to do, you have to do that, or the rest of your tribal members are going to look like they're not going to evict me. I don't need to pay. And you don't want that reputation either. When I took my job, I had a whole project full of people that had $10,000 balances. You should never have a person with $1,000 balance, let alone a $10,000 balance. Guess what? They all paid it back. We put payment agreements in there, but we had to be really careful because then they were so high that they owed their current rent and all that money. So I had to, you know, negotiate with my tribal chairman, how much is a fair amount? And then, you know, this is how much, and we're charging everybody this. Everybody's going to pay this. You have to pay this in addition to this. A much smaller amount than would be allowed for a normal payback agreement. Okay. But don't let it get to that point. So your payback agreements can be negotiated with the delinquent resident as an alternative to immediate termination, though the policy can limit the number of times that they can enter into a payback agreement, because that's just as bad as when they breach that. Okay. You have to, when you're going to do something, you have to do it. Failure to make the required monthly payment or breach of the subsequent payback agreement, termination of the residence lease or home ownership agreement may result in a permanent loss of eligibility for future services or benefits offered by your tribal housing program. And you need to tell them that during that process. We're not going to take your application again until this is paid. And depending on where you're at, some programs won't let you move in with somebody else under our housing because you owe us money. So depends on where you're at, what rules you have. If that resident does not comply with the notice of delinquency, or the resident otherwise breaches the lease, the resident may be served with a written notice of termination by certified mail, return receipt requested. The notice states that the reason for the termination, and the resident can respond to that notice and cure that violation or bring that, you know, delinquent amount current. The resident has the right to request a hearing in accordance with your grievance procedures if there is a discrepancy with any of the notices. Otherwise, the recipient may begin your administrative hearing process. That's why it's so important to do the same thing, the same way, regardless of who it is. Like I said, remember I told you the story, but I don't want to give him a late fee. It's the tribal chairman. He's especially who you should be giving that late fee to. You don't give anybody preferential treatment, you know, so do things the same way. At the administrative hearing, if the resident is delinquent and not yet and has not violated any of the other provisions, your staff can actually negotiate that payback agreement at that time with the home buyer or the resident, so they'll be required to pay an additional amount on top of their required monthly payment to pay off that past due balance. If the resident defaults on the payback agreement, the recipient may commence those eviction proceedings. So your collection procedures, the resident has the right to request a hearing in accordance with your grievance procedures if there's a discrepancy with any of those notices. That's why it's so important to send those out in a timely manner also. Otherwise, that recipient may begin your administrative hearing process. At the hearing, if the resident is delinquent and has not violated any of those things, you're back to that payback agreement again with the home buyer. to pay an additional amount on top of their required payment. If the resident defaults, the recipient may start that again. So your eviction, if collection and negotiation efforts are not successful, an eviction proceeding provides a remedy of last resort, and that's what they call it, upon termination of a lease or a homeownership agreement and the failure of the resident to peacefully vacate the unit within the required time, the recipient may file a civil action against the resident for eviction and restitution in the appropriate legal jurisdiction. The complaint is usually premised on the breach of the resident's agreement with the tribe or the housing authority. The contractual breach arises from non-payment or failure to make your full monthly payment. Other violations not pertaining to the non-payment or failure to make full monthly payment shall be defined as other just cause. Copies of the lease or homeownership agreement and notices, delinquencies, terminations, administrative hearings, intent to sue should be attached as exhibits to that legal complaint. The recipient asked the court for an eviction of the resident and judgment of the delinquent amount owed. So, if the resident has paid the delinquent amount in full or has made a payment agreement which has been agreed upon by both parties before the court date, there may be a motion to dismiss without prejudice with the court, along with the stipulated judgment. Alternatively, the court may order the resident to pay the delinquent amount within a specified period, or may order the resident to be evicted. The ability to use eviction as a remedy depends on the applicable legal jurisdiction in which you sit, program being administered. For example, eviction is not used within Oklahoma or Alaska for home ownership programs. Benefits of collection. Certainly good news and bad news with NAHASDA with respect to tribal housing programs and our ability to collect amount due. The good news is that the program flexibility allows housing programs to tailor charges and responsibilities to community requirements, needs, and affordability. No minimum charge is required. For example, a recipient may build a home, give it to a qualified family with basic requirements for occupancy and insurance for its useful life. The housing program can even pick up the cost of the insurance. As discussed, the maximum charge for a rental or a lease purchase program for low-income families is 30% of their adjusted family income, with some common ceiling charges of a local fair market rent or a conventional mortgage loan. The bad news is that failure to collect these charges hurts your housing programs and the limited resources and tremendous unmet need we have through Indian country. It requires families pay something for the housing services that they receive. Housing has to remain affordable and insured for assistance in excess of $5,000 for its useful life. The recipient is responsible to ensure compliance. The cost of collections, insurance, maintenance, repairs, bad debt expense, legal, and other charges all take away from the potential for offering any, other affordable housing activities to your tribal members. So your credit basics in the private sector, credit policy is essential to optimize, sales, gross margins, profit and business settings. It's a decision-making process that establishes the relationship between the business and its customers. That relationship is often described in terms such as the 4 C's, credit, capacity, capital, and collateral. Finding the right balance is often a combination of science and art. Similarly, the public sector, governments and nonprofits establish policies to extend services to their members, constituents, or the public. When these services require payment, or other types of performance, standards are established and applied. So, credit basics. For example, a homeownership program may include both minimum and maximum income standards for applicants. A maximum standard because the program is limited or targeted to low-income families. A minimum standard because the program requires financial capacity to pay a required monthly payment. Utilities, insurance, and maintenance. Families which earn or receive less than the minimum standard can be predicted to encounter difficulties in meeting their financial obligations. The flexibilities offered by NAHASDA allow tribal housing programs to establish a credit relationship through their housing program policies and procedures. Effective policies will consider the needs and the abilities of the customers and establish a rapport that will result in a successful relationship. So your program design considerations, some of the questions you have to consider when you're developing a program or new housing assistance programs are in the line with the needs and wants of your community. Can your tribal housing program and families afford the program? Will the families pay for it? There may be other questions along with anticipated answers, which are going to have to be included within your housing program policies. There's 3 recommendations, finally recognizing the differences and special circumstances found throughout Indian country. Our tribes and our housing authorities may want to consider. Everyone has a role in collections and compliance. Everything they do can have an impact on your program success. Make all the efforts for collection and compliance positive and constructive. Remember, we have our jobs because we're supposed to be trying to help those, our members. It's really important. Case management, like a lot of different work in social services, collections, compliance is most effective done on a case-by-case basis. Customers and families benefit by case management. A model for case management for housing collections and compliance is illustrated with a grid established by 2 factors, your willingness and your ability to pay. To the extent that the family's conditions and circumstances can be identified, the model places the families in one of 4 quadrants, which identifies possible or appropriate actions along with desirable skills for case managers. Housing staff associated with the appropriate collections and compliance activities should be identified and developed. Some of these include customer service, communication, counseling, and legal services. So are they willing? Are they receptive to a plan? Are they willing to work with you looking for a permanent selection? Or are they unable? They don't want to communicate, can't get blood from a stone. So this is a case management tool that different people use. And this explains that grid. Not going to run you through that. Your collection tips, establish the ability and willingness to evict. As I said before, if you never evict anybody, you're blowing hot air. They're not going to believe you. Match your policies with your practices. Follow up. Make sure your promises are always kept. Don't promise somebody something you're not going to do. Use receipts. Remember to say thank you. Recognize a participant of the month. We used to wait until summertime and we would supply stones and painting supplies to our Boys and Girls Club. They would paint these stones for the prettiest bushes, for the nicest yard, for, the prettiest garden or the nicest, trees and all of these different things. And they would go out and they would award them to our tenants and they would really try to, to get those stones out there. You can have, you can advertise a program that if you pay your rent in full by the 15th of every month through November, on December, you'll waive the payment. You'd be surprised at how many people won't make a late payment so they can get it waived. Hey, that's a Christmas money. You're allowed to do certain things like that. Make sure you, figure out how much it's going to cost you as a program, but you can do things like that. You can recognize that participant of the month. Aggressively offer job placement, help with that, promote self-sufficiency, address the toughest cases with your whole staff in a monthly meeting. Any of you guys got any ideas? Revisit incentives for prompt payment, communicate with both spouses in the family. Like I said, a lot of times one spouse doesn't know what the other one's doing. The wife's spending too much money shopping or whatever, and the husband he doesn't look at any financing. He's assuming that all his bills are being paid. His money's getting direct deposited. I've seen that happen. Develop skills and using your appropriate court system also. Active listening, communication. You need to work closely with your residents during occupancy to resolve a broad range of issues. Make sure you're hearing it, an active listener. Listening into an intent, they call, you know, that nonverbal communication. You think they're really at their back like this? They don't want to be in there. They don't care what you're saying. You can read that out of a person, you know. Smile, open stance, lean forward, touch, make sure you look at them, nod, you're hearing them, you know, there's different things that you can do. Like I said, it really matters which staff members you put in certain positions. Monitor your nonverbal communications and your filters. Listen to the speaker with empathy and without judgment. You know, your judgmental people shouldn't sit in certain positions, okay? Eliminate external distractions. Don't be in a room where there's people walking back and forth that you have to shut up as people walk through. You know, come to meetings prepared, take notes if your mind wanders. Don't respond only to what the speaker implies. Respond to the total communication, you know, including the content, some of those nonverbal clues. Identify words that trigger your emotions. Somebody makes you mad right off the bat, you're not listening to them anymore. Don't prepare your response while somebody's speaking. Listen to the person. Don't listen with your mind already made up. Negotiate behavior with yourself. You know when you're behaving badly, okay? Don't rely on others to interpret what somebody said. Another great way is to make your communications more effective is to be a reflective listener. Continue to practice good active listening. Provide feedback to your speakers. Make sure it's expressed without judgment. You know, your occupancy specialists sometimes have to negotiate with residents to solve problems. There's books on that, successful negotiating. That's the art of reaching an agreement. 8 steps to successful negotiations. Unravel the mystery. Understand what drives you and others. Learn to celebrate differences. Negotiate with honor, knowledge, and understanding. That's a huge one. Do your homework before negotiating. Negotiate actively, honestly, and fairly. Create a champion from a non-sayer, and create satisfaction with the outcome. So your HUD monitoring, they're going to come in. It's just a matter of when. The bigger you are, the more often they come. Okay, the smaller ones, they don't quite, unless you've had a bad one. You have monitoring findings where they might have waited 6 years. They might come at 4. Okay, they're backed up right now. They were backed up because of COVID. I think they're backed up at least one fiscal year. They got halfway through 2020s, I think it was. So they will be there, and occupancy is one of their, and procurement. Those are your 2 places you really, really got to shine. Environmental. And they're going to look at all your policies too. So through oversight and monitoring, your grants evaluation division, but they're there to help you. So prepare for them. Call them when you need help. Ensures programs are implemented in a timely manner in compliance with all your applicable requirements. Identifies instances and trends that indicate superior, satisfactory, or a deficit in your performance. Develops and implements actions to reinforce, improve, correct some of your, or supplement your recipient performance as appropriate, and identifies technical assistant needs. We'd like you to go out and get some, admissions and occupancy. We found a few mistakes with these files. Or we'd like you to take, contracting and procurement. You need help with your finance. Your things are slow, outdated. They're not compliant with 200. They're looking at 87 or something like that. They're there to help you though. So that monitoring, it reviews the performance of you as a recipient, determines whether you've carried out your eligible activities in a timely manner. Have eligible activities and certifications in accordance with your programs and your requirements and your other applicable laws. and you have a continuing capacity to carry out those activities in a timely manner. It can consist of on-site reviews, off-site or remote, review of records, reports, audits. On-site reviews are conducted at your offices, and they can actually include visits to your housing sites. Grant recipients may be requested to provide additional information to the ONAP office after completion of that visit and before completion of the final review. Unusual situations aside, that area ONAP will provide written notice and details of that monitoring visit at least 30 days in advance. A remote review consists of a thorough review of all the information available in the area ONAP's files concerning your grant recipient. The area ONAP may request submission of information from the grant recipient to supplement information available in the HUD's records prior to the completion of the review. Upon completion of either type of review, a draft report is going to be provided to you as a recipient per 24 CFR 1528. HUD's going to issue this report within 30 days to review and comment, and you can request an additional 30-day time extension for comment if needed. Once that comment period has expired, HUD's going to issue a final monitoring report that determines if that recipient has carried out their eligible activities in a timely manner and to identify any areas of concern or non-compliance, and will address any of the comments or the explanations that they received. Non-compliance monitoring report stipulates areas of program violations, requires, your TDHE to submit a corrective action plan with timeframes. Additional training and TA can be required for, remedial action. Your tribe or TDHE will need to enter into a performance agreement, for that corrective action. And failure to elevate performance problems, or address your performance problems may elevate, to what they call a substantial non-compliance, but they are there to help. I've got to, make sure you guys understand. If you don't know how to do something, call them. They'll help you. There's a person in every ONAP office that can help you with training and technical assistance. You can get it through ONAP officials themselves, or they can, ask different people to do that for you. That, what we do. So substantial non-compliance, there's a letter of warning issued to the recipient. It requests the recipient to submit progress schedules, compliance actions, recommends a recipient to suspend, discontinue, or not incur further cost. It could recommend the recipient to redirect funds from affected activities to other activities, or reimburse an account in case that money was expended wrong. Or recommended, TA, either using, your IHBG funds or them supplying it. I've never seen them really charge for TA. There's, TA money out there. That's what they're there to help. They're there to hope you succeed. Non-compliance is a two-step process. They review the circumstances on that case-by-case basis to determine if performance problems are substantial. Has to be non-compliance with NAHASDA. Non-compliance must be substantial. It must have a material effect on you meeting your IHP goals, represent a material pattern of practice of activities, or something that would constitute a willful non-compliance, involves an obligation or expenditure of a material amount, or places your program at a substantial risk for fraud or waste or abuse. Some of the remedies, they could actually terminate the payments to you as a recipient. Now, that's a, last step. They're going to work with you. They'll get you people to help you. They want you to succeed, but you can't just blow them off and ignore them. Yeah, you have to pay attention, okay? Reduce payments by an amount equal to the amount that was not expended in accordance with those NAHASDA regs. Limit the availability of payments to programs or projects or activities not affected by your failure to comply. Some of your future grants can be affected by that when you have opening monitoring and audit findings, so replace the TDHE for the recipient, a pattern of willful non-compliance. Opportunity for an administrative hearing procedure. can be found at 24 CFR 26 and can be used, or they could actually refer you to the U.S. Attorney General for civil action. But, you know, you guys aren't going to be that bad. You're going to do it right. So how do you help? Make sure you follow all your policies and procedures. Make sure they're consistent with the statutes. You should ensure that you have them in place, have standard operating procedures, and your policies allow for uniform implementation and documentation by your staff. Don't put a policy in there that you're not going to follow. Ensure your tribe, your TDHE, all your new staff, your boards, both boards know about ethics and conduct, policy training. Conduct self-assessment prior to year end, so you're, compliant with that APR. Develop performance improvement plans with timeframes for self-correction. Your boards of commissioners and your tribes should attend, different conventions, regional, NIHC, things like that. Get that training. Tribal leadership should maintain close relationships with your TDHE while monitoring your goals, your progress, with reports being made by that executive director, and that there are monitoring plans here. Guys, there is all sorts of plans. Look at these for admissions and occupancy. If you do this in conjunction with your self-monitoring, you're going to catch all your own mistakes. And don't try to hide them. Put a big sticker on them and say, this one does not contain proof that they were income eligible at the time of admission. Tell on yourself. And then you write that as part of, we're going to try to fix this. We're going to make sure that this is done. But these are all, I want you to look at these, especially for admin and occupancy. And look, they'll really, really help you. Review sampling methods, it's do the files support documentation verifying income prior to providing, insurance or assistance, so every one of these are here for you to look at. So that's in here. Use them all. This is an occupancy review form. Is it a native family? Is there proof of enrollment or other documentation on file? If the family was non-native, is there documentation that they're essential to the well-being of the family? Just go through this and fill this out for every single one of your files. This 2-3 page one will really help you, okay? Down payment assistance, it's the same thing. Do you have proof of enrollment? Do you have an annual income at the time of application? What's the family size? What's your income limit? This is the same thing for your rehab program. This is the one for your rental assistance. This is the one for your home ownership. And these are the useful lives that are usually used. You need to go to your APR and see what your terms for useful life are. These are the 2 program guidances. You can read further on that. And then these are all the appendix items that we have. And I'm almost 15 minutes late, guys. Make sure you pull these down while you can still get them. And that's all, folks. What kind of questions do we have today?
Okay.
And I hope you liked it.
So while I list out the questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch today's survey. If you could please fill that out, is greatly appreciated. Question number 1 is, Dorothy, can we evict someone for not signing the rental agreement?
Yes. They have to sign the rental agreement, but you have to be able to prove that you were trying to get them to do that. Now, it depends on if it's at the initial time. It can't be because they're already in there. So yes, but your policy should reflect that they have to sign all of your leases, your agreements, your release of information, and that they have to provide all of the, within a time frame, make sure it's in there, a time frame for their recertifications, and that they have to go through their inspections.
Okay, our next question is from Stephanie. Does the junk car valid license or insurance have to be in our policies to use this? Currently, we have taken pics of the vehicle and tabs. If they are outdated, that is another cue for us to call it a junk vehicle, but none of that is in our policy.
You need your policy to reflect that. But you can get a hold of them, call them up, write them a letter, while you're redoing their policy, and you need to find a policy and put it in place. And say, this is what we're doing. I'm giving you a heads up. You're going to need to get rid of this vehicle. Most people, when you actually reach out in person, will understand. But you just can't reach out to one. You got to be consistent across the board. But you need to update your policy.
Okay, and the next question is Dorothy again regarding the interim certification. So isn't it all supposed to be scheduled, or we can recertify anytime?
You can do a recertification anytime. They can come in and say, hey, I just lost my job, or hey, I just got a new raise, or I just got a new job. You know, that's up to the policies of your place, but you should do recertifications all the time.
Okay, and then she also wants to know, oh, so since it's a village I live in and everyone knows who's doing what, some people are trying to get away with not listing all people in the house to supposedly reduce income for rent or eligibility for emergency repairs. Can we not accept until they list everyone in the house? Not one of them works full time, sigh. I've got to be everything here, acting director, janitor, apartment manager, and now housing counselor, A&O officer.
That's what happens, unfortunately, when you're a small housing authority and you're forced to wear all those hats. And I feel for her. We call that situation an invisible tenant. And sometimes it's really, really hard to prove that somebody doesn't live within that household. You can, discuss it with the head of the household and tell them that should you be able to prove that, they're in there, they could be charged with fraud, program fraud. But you should deal with your leadership and ask for what they think a good plan of action would be, whether it be using tribal police or somebody else, but just proceed with caution to make sure she does it fairly.
Okay, thank you for that, Cheryl. And then Bessie also had a question. So you have a sample of payback calculator. When they didn't let you know the tenant has been working for over a year, does it have to be in the policy?
Call your HUD office.
Okay, that's all the questions. I just want to say thank you, Cheryl, so much for the last 5 days. Really appreciate it. I know it's been crazy with a hurricane, so thank you so much for being here and
No
able to do
worries.
this for us. And thank you everyone for joining us for our virtual trainings. They will be uploaded in YouTube within a week or two, depending. But you can access all the material in the PDFs through the material link, which I can post one more time just in case anybody would like it. Thank you, everyone.
And I just wanted to jump in really quick and thank you guys for joining here. And thank you again, Cheryl.
No
I know
worries.
these week-long trainings are intense, but we all know how important this information is. So definitely.
Thank you guys. You guys have a great day and all stay safe.
Yes. And have a good weekend, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.